All right, so we're going to take a look real quick at your GAB dampener plate. We've got one here. It's actually partially set up. We're going to show you how to install it on your Thicc. We're also going to talk about a variety of mounting techniques for different types of cameras. Here in my hand, I have a Z-Cam, and then we've got a Komodo mount, and we've also got the traditional plate mount for DSLR, as well as some 3D prints. These all make for some really variable differences in how you're going to actually attach things and how it's going to work. But before we get to that, like I said, we'd like to start with the dampening plate itself. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and show you what we already have set up. So here you see we have the dampening plate partially ready to install. It's got 4 screw holes. Those screw holes also have grommets that go through them, and then these spacers. So I'll show you these grommets, Alphagel. When you have your Alphagel for the first time, it's actually going to be a complete piece, 2 pieces put together, and it looks like it's one solid piece. It's not. It's actually got a line down it that if you start to separate it, you'll peel them apart, and you end up with a top piece and a bottom piece in terms of how this dampening plate is mounted. So the bottom piece is the one that has the bushing in it. You're going to put that from the bottom side up in the holes all the way around the plate. And then you're going to make sure that's firmly pressed in there and nicely seated. And then you're going to take the top piece and make sure the right piece is down, the wider section goes down with the narrower opening at the top. And you're just going to want to make sure that sits nicely all around the top of that piece of dampener coming through. Next, we're going to take the screws and we're going to put one of the flat carbon washers at the end of it. And we're going to put that from the top down through the dampener. And then on the bottom side, this is where it gets tricky. You're going to want to go ahead and put the other washers all the way around. The washers kind of stick if you squeeze them to the dampeners. And then from here on out, you're just going to want to kind of hold the plate maybe upright. Meantime, and you're going to want to prepare your Thicc beforehand. I could have mentioned that, sorry. We're going to want to remove the front screws and the rear screws that coordinate with however this dampening plate is going on. Depending on if you put it upside down or not, or which way you put it, will determine which screws you use. In my case, we're using the front left, and we're using the back right. I'm going to get those first 2 kind of lined up, and then I'm going to get these other 2 on the sides that go through the side of the hole plates, and we're going to get those going through. And basically, once we get these 2 through, oh, I had some that got in there. There we go. And everything is just where it goes. We're just going to stop there and talk for a second. Oh. There we go. There we go. All right. So now that you have everything just in place, we're going to go ahead and start by screwing down the first 2 screws in the nose and the tail. Again, if you have this plate the other way, it's going to be the front right and the rear left. That is of no real consequence. But before we tighten down, let's talk about real quick the options we have in mounting. So if we're going to be using the Komodo mount, it gets zip tied directly to this plate. You can see I have zip ties in 4, 6 places. Those go through some coordinating holes on the plates. You can go ahead and get those zip tied in, and this whole thing gets zip tied straight to that plate. You can do that before or after this plate gets mounted. Same thing goes for your Z-Cam or BGH1 mounts. Very similar mounts. They also have zip tie holes they can go in. You could, if you wanted to, screw from the bottom side up screws into some nuts that have little holders on the sides of these prints. But quite frankly, the zip tie method is better because you can make sure that it's really nicely tight and you can cut them off. Those screws, if you screw in and you start to tear the TPU or tighten too tight, you can really cause some damage to your prints. Now, the other mount that's possible to use is going to be the DSLR printed mount that's a three-piece wedge. This three-piece wedge comes apart and goes together and creates a mount that can be put flat on this surface. And then you can strap in your camera using the straps here and the straps across the lens. Now, I will say this is not really the best method for DSLRs in Blackmagic pockets. It does work, but it can be very tedious to find long enough straps. And so there's some methodologies to that, but really the solution is if you can't get this strapped in nicely, the next solution would be to go to your original dampening plate and then installing that original dampening plate onto the Alphagel. Now to do this, you've already taken this original plate off to put this on. So you're really, before screwing this plate down, what you're gonna do is you're gonna reinstall from the bottom up the front mounts and the rear mounts on this plate. And when you do, they line up nicely with those holes. You can also get everything nicely lined up and you can get everything on there. And now you've got a adjustable angle with that original mount on top of the Alphagel plate. All right, so that's those traditional mounts and how to get those on. Now we're gonna go ahead and talk about getting everything tightened down. So in order to get everything tightened down, there's just really one thing you need to know. When we are trying to tighten screws, we want to hold the Alphagel and the washer down. So I don't know if you can see this, but I'm pushing down just a little bit in order to make sure that the Alphagel itself does not turn, or the washer. And then I'm going to tighten this down. Now I'm not putting a ton of pressure because what I'm also doing is kind of setting where I'm going to stop the screw. So you're really only wanting to just squeeze these dampeners down just a couple of millimeters. You want them to kind of engage with each other and kind of start to kind of flatten out. But in reality, you want movement. You don't want to tighten them down really, really hard. So really, I'm also kind of pushing this down to just that limit of where I'm going to push these screws down to. So again, we're going to do this. We're going to get these front and back ones. There we go. We've got it nicely to where it's still got some nice play in it. So now we're going to move over to the sides. Sides are really simple. Same thing. We're going to hold that washer and that dampener down as we get all this stuff tightened up. Oops. But we're just going to use these lock nuts and we're going to secure them all the way down. It does get a little tricky because you have to use a driver, so to speak, but basically I can get this started, and as soon as it starts to grip, I can hold my fingers. There we go. Oops. And once again, we're just looking to get it engaged. We're not looking for these screws to be, or these dampeners to be sucked down super tight. Just nicely engaged and to where there's no wobble. I'm gonna go ahead and do the other side real quick. All right, now that we've got both the sides and the fronts done, I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to install these zip ties. So again, we can get these zip ties nicely threaded through all these holes. One. Second one goes through this Velcro slot. Same thing here on the other side, Velcro slot. And you notice I'm not tightening these down yet. We need to go ahead and get them all in there. The front one is going to go through that little hole in the front, and then you might need to fish it out this bigger hole. Little trick is to bend the tips in a curve. And use a little screwdriver, or in this case, I'm using a dental pick. I got that front one. That front one really is probably the only one that's really a pain. We got that. We can go ahead and go through these side slots. Again, you notice I'm not tightening these down. We're just installing them loosely just to get them where they're not going to fall out or anything. Like they're going to stay where we want them. And we also will then lock them down at the end with everything once we position it and make sure everything's nicely positioned. So last one, other side goes through again, that Velcro slot. Oops. And this goes for any of the prints. They all have slots to be zip tied down. So now that we've got it where we want, we're going to make sure the holes, if you look at the top, we're going to make sure those holes are alignment. And we're going to lock the top and the bottom, the front and the back down first. Once we have those, everything else is nicely aligned. So now we can go ahead, and I like to do front and then the back opposite. And then we'll do front over here. And the last one. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and just verify none of them need to be tightened down just a little. Nope, 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 nope. And now we can go ahead and cut those all off. So now you can see how this is zip tied in place. It's sturdy where it needs to be. When we're finished at the gig and we need to put this thing back in its case or bag or wherever it is, super simple. Go through, cut your zip ties, and everything comes off. Now, last thing that we're going to do, we're going to install the Komodo camera on this bracket. And so this is a dummy camera. We have the aluminum brackets necessary to mount them. So these are off a Sicario, basically. It's the same mounting bracket. You take these and we screw these in with the two bolts that go into the side of the camera. You do both sides. And then we're going to have these larger screws and washers that are going to be on each side and screw into the camera or into the brackets in order to tighten it down and get it into position, as well as have you adjust the angle. So, super simple. One last note. This strap here, I would use it most of the time. I would use it with the dummy camera because if not, they're going to start to go wide. They're going to start to spread wide and they're going to pull out and it's never going to get locked in, especially on the Sicario. More so though, also, even with the real camera, you may want to find a strap that fits in between like this, just to kind of keep those from bending outwards. That aluminum does bend just a little bit. So we're going to start. And I always start with the rear holes. And we're just going to put that rear screw in at the bottom. Hand tight works. And then we can go ahead and line up the top hole, get it in place. And top hole. Now everything's just loose in there, so we can go ahead and adjust the angle, get the camera centered in there nicely. And now we can go ahead and we would use a tool to go ahead and tighten down those screws. But there we go. We're now set up with the dummy Komodo camera or if you had a full-size Komodo and this thing is on there. There's no, it's not flopping around or anything. All right, I hope this helps you get your Alphagel set up. If you have any questions, let us know. Fly safe, fly smart. Just fly.